Here we are. Boy, this is going to be interesting this week when you guys lose this football game, but we'll see. We'll see how that plays out in Cleveland. We need to get to something else first in our 5 and 5, but from the divorce to the crypto scheme to the now losing to the Cleveland Browns, low point after low point after low point, and you're not even in New England. That's got to hurt. Like, you're not even in New England anymore. You don't even have the bubble around you where it's like, oh, no. Yeah, you don't say that about Tom Brady, please. You're in Tampa, where half the people rooting for you and own season tickets aren't even from Tampa. This one, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, wherever you are, wherever you may be from, is what we do 5 and 5. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, because the clock is about to start right now. And yes, we're going to get to that coming up in a sec. I'm going to open up with a 2-team teaser. What the hell are we talking about here? What? Yes, a 2-team teaser. The clock is running, so don't waste my time back there. We're going to take the Panthers at +1 and the Titans at +2.5, and we're going to move these through key numbers. We'll keep the Panthers at 7, although I would like it to be at 7.5. So, yeah, okay. You know what? You've convinced me behind me. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. We'll roll this as a 6.5-point teaser. Now we're good. We are covered through 7 now with the Carolina Panthers, and we are covered through 8.5 with the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are the most undervalued, underrated team in the NFL, and every single 6-point teaser played against the Denver Broncos this year has covered. So we cannot neglect two big things right now, which is how much the public continues to undervalue the Titans and how good the Carolina Panthers defense is and how bad Denver is. And yeah, we want to definitely do that. All right, so we keep this moving now. And I mentioned the guy behind me. We're just going to go under 42. Under 42 in Cleveland. It's a good bet here. Unders tend to roll in Cleveland as we get through the end of November, December, and yes, January. Weather, wind, all of that plays a factor. It's also the Bucs. Now, the Bucs don't run at all. They haven't really committed consistently to the run, but down Leonard Fournette, they're going to have to do something. Tom Brady's not throwing for many touchdown passes, so that's going to have to change. Jacoby Brissett is turning the football over left and right at a ridiculous clip here. It is his last time out, so you might see a couple of YOLO throws that'll be picked off or what have you. Big risk by a guy normally isn't known for that. So I like going under here. Turnovers, short fields that are short drives, that will turn into longer fields. It's going to be a lot of punts. It's going to be a lot of frustration, and that's why we go under 42. All right, Bears-Jets. Mike White in. We don't know about Fields, but it's pretty much trending towards Fields not playing with that shoulder injury. So a couple of backups in tow. I want to go under 19.5 in the first half total. And that's also going to be a lot of running. Both teams would much rather run than throw, especially with backup quarterback mode here. This isn't going to be defenses just coming in like, okay, we got this. This is not a Milwaukee Bucks team taking on the Orlando Magic with like 6 guys down for the Magic. The Bears have no choice but to play better defense. And the Jets have been playing really good defense. So I don't see a lot of points. Mike White isn't that big of a drop-off, if at all, for Zach Wilson, but their offense just isn't that good. So you look at the Bears right now and what they have to deal with, overcoming Justin Fields isn't that big of a hurdle only in this game and this specific game. I don't want that to be like some large statement by any means. All right, now I'm heading out here to this game Sunday night, and I want to make sure that I have the right bet in. So let's go back and go down to Sunday Night Football. And I'm trying, just so you know, on the Discord to cash out of my 6.5 Eagles ticket. I think the better play is just to go under 46. Both teams are going to find their way. Look, the Eagles' first half used to be insane because of that second quarter. Now you start to take away the outlier, which is these super high-scoring second quarters, and what are you left with? Well, you're left with a team that's struggling to score a lot of points. And 46 is a high number, especially for the Packers, who are going to run and try to keep Jalen Hurts and that Eagles offense off the field, and an Eagles team that will pick up chunks at time, but will also foolishly revert away from or back, I guess, to the passing game after they've established the run. And that can slow things down from a scoring standpoint. A couple of 3-and-outs, a couple of stalled drives. Under 46 on a Sunday night primetime game where neither offense is really anything special. Last game for you, plus 125, Steelers. Steelers on the road, they win this thing outright. Monday night. Why? Defense. Minkah Fitzpatrick is back. TJ Watt is back. This team is significantly better than the Colts right now.
No MMA today. What do you think? Do we think they're bringing late swap back next week, Neil, or are they going to ditch it after 1 week?
I mean, they're absolutely going to bring it back after the main card was canceled last time.
But the whole, it also messed up their entire thing.
It did.
So let's see.
I would have preferred if that had not happened. The main card being canceled, because I feel like they're going to think that now it was the right decision.
I don't know. They got a lot of bad feedback for it. It just seemed like a mess.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Stokastic NFL Tournament Strategy Show. As you come in, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because as per usual, every Saturday, myself and Millie Maker winner, Neil Orfield, we break down the slate from a tournament angle. We talk about our favorite tournament plays on both FanDuel and DraftKings, our favorite stacks, our favorite leverage options. Neil, what's going on? How's your week going?
It's going well. We're hosting my wife's family for Thanksgiving. Her parents are here right now. As soon as I get off this show, I actually don't know what time everybody else is coming over, but yeah, celebrating Thanksgiving for a third day in a row. So things going well. How are you doing?
It's well, I did 1 day of Thanksgiving celebrations. I have eaten mashed potatoes for just about every meal since Thursday, because I love mashed potatoes are my favorite food. I love mashed potatoes. So I went to my parents for Thanksgiving. My mom made extra mashed potatoes just for me, and it's just a giant container of them. And then I could just eat it for every meal until I run out of mashed potatoes, and I have to eat more like a civilized human being. So the celebration, I guess, if it's just mashed potatoes, which for me is what a lot of it is, then it's still going. But no football games the other days, so that is something that's a little bit different. But we got football coming back for tomorrow, the 11-game slate, so a little bit smaller than usual, but I guess it could have potentially been a lot smaller when you consider there was 3 Thursday games. But just looking ahead to the Sunday slate, are there any kind of big picture overarching themes that you're thinking about when you look at tomorrow's slate?
I just want clarification before we get into the slate. Do you eat just mashed potatoes, or do you have other stuff with your mashed potatoes?
I have other stuff with it, but I like mashed potatoes the most by a lot.
Okay. All right. Just want to clarify. I thought that's a lot of starch if that's all you're eating. Yeah, this is an interesting slate. We've got a few starting running backs out. We've got a couple of starting quarterbacks out. I'm just looking for the first time at our boom bust and noticing that we have the Chiefs defense for 31.5% projected ownership. That's a lot of ownership on a defense. I think it's going to be a fun slate, to be honest. We have no buys this week, so we actually have like a regular size slate, despite the Thanksgiving slate taking away 3 games. Yeah, I think it'll be a fun one. Do you have any thoughts on this slate? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I want to ask you, because we don't talk too much about defense here. It's my least favorite position. I think that talking about it is a little bit of a fool's errand, just from a standpoint of the ownership tends to be really flat. It's very difficult to project what the actual fantasy production is going to be for defenses. And defense, unlike other positions, typically the best projected defenses are like 2.5 projected fantasy points better than the least one. And I can't remember. I was reading, somebody had done some study and tweeted out that there's actually no correlation between fantasy point performance and fantasy point ownership, which is for defensive purposes, which goes to show how hard it is to project defenses. With that in mind, how are you going to approach the Chiefs when they are going to be maybe the most popular spot on the entire slate as the defense?
So I don't think that I'm going to X them out. Like, I don't think that would be the wrong decision if you are playing a large field GPP, just to X out the 31.5% projected defense, because, you know, we have them as pretty negative leverage, but we do have them the optimal 17% of the time. So my guess, what I typically do is I just set an ownership cap on defenses. The 2 places where I set hard ownership caps are quarterback and defenses on most slates. And I usually set that at 20%. I'm probably going to set my ownership cap at 20% and end up with about 20% Chiefs. So if they do get it in at 31.5% ownership, I'll be under the field. If they come in, you know, unexpectedly low, I'll still have a good amount of a defense that, as I said, I'm still optimal 17% of the time. So they make a lot of sense. But obviously over owned in a large field GPP. So I'll be under the field if they get to that number, but I'm not completely Xing them. Again, I don't think that would be necessarily the wrong decision to X the extremely chalky defense, but not how I'm approaching it. Are you going to X them out, or are you going to be playing some Chiefs D?
I'm going to see when I just build my lineups optimally how they come out, and then I'll probably make some decisions from there. Like if I'm running projections and it just comes out that my lineups are significantly better looking with them at defense, then I'll probably just be like, okay, it's a defense. I don't think it makes a massive difference, and I'll just roll with it. But if it is a thing where it's like, hey, there's other defense that I'm rating out comparably that I'm getting a mix of, then yeah, I'll probably just what I'm most likely to do is give them a thumbs down in Fantasy Crunch and then build out lineups and see how that changes it often. That's something that will balance it out more. And then I'll just run lineups like, oh, okay, cool. I ended up getting like 10% Chiefs or something like that after I give them the thumbs down. So that's probably most likely what I'll do. But I also haven't committed to anything a day in advance of the slate.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little early to be. I haven't run any crunches or anything like that, but yeah, it seems reasonable.
But I do highly doubt that I will be at the Fields number of the 31% that we currently have projected. Now, could that change by tomorrow? Perhaps, but to me, it does look like they're going to be a little bit too popular in tournaments for my liking. But let's start talking about some of the quarterbacks, some of the stacks that we're liking for this slate. And for the second time ever, we have a stack that is picking up a perfect 100 score, Neil, in our top stacks to them. It is the Miami Dolphins. Well, actually, there's one on DraftKings, one on FanDuel. On DK, it's the Miami Dolphins. On FanDuel, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. There's only one other team that's had a perfect stack score in our top stack score this year. Do you remember who it was?
It was Miami. I know Miami was. So yes. I believe there were two. I thought there were two this year. Maybe you have the actual data in front of you. I thought that there was back-to-back weeks where we had a perfect 100 rating, but maybe that. Oh, maybe it was early in the week and then it was lowered by the time we did the Saturday show. I think that's what happened. But yeah, I believe it was the Dolphins, right?
Yes, it was the Dolphins, and it was a game where they ended up crushing as well. It was a game where Tua had a big game, and then, of course, a big Tua game means a big game for Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill because those are the only two guys that he throws the football to. I love getting to them whenever we're rating them out really well, and that seems to be the case this week. So we have them 8% ownership going to Tua, 24% chance to be the top stack over on DraftKings. For FanDuel purposes, 10% ownership, 12% chance to be a top stack. A little bit lower, especially from the standpoint of that there's less of a PPR bonus and some of the players are more expensive over on FanDuel. But either way, I like them a bunch on both sides. And what's great about stacking the Dolphins, if they go off, you know who the big games are. There isn't like some tertiary wide receiver who pops up and goes for over 100 yards. It is Tua, it is Jalen Waddle, it is Tyreek Hill, and you really don't have to be concerned with too many other pieces.
Yeah, it's true. It's a very easy stack to build just because you know exactly what you are building for. My only real concern with it is that they're playing the Texans, which obviously it's a great spot. Texans 25th in terms of pass DVOA. It's just a matter of can the Texans keep up enough that the Dolphins are going to continue throwing the ball in the fourth quarter, or are they just going to be, running the game out at that point? Because it's a 14-point spread in this game. They might not need to be throwing the ball like they would if they were playing the Chiefs or, another team that has a really great offense. So that's the biggest concern with the stack. But if Tua is going to be only 8% owned and, we've got chalky Jeff Wilson, so a little bit of leverage on Jeff Wilson ownership, I think it obviously makes a lot of sense from a GPP perspective.
Yeah, I think the Dolphins, at least for DraftKings purposes, going to be my most rostered stack. FanDuel, they also seem to make a whole lot of sense. Now, here's an interesting talking point for this slate because we've got the Chiefs as being a really good stack on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So DK, we've got them 10% ownership for Mahomes with a 15% chance to be a top stack. Over on FanDuel, 12% ownership for Mahomes with a 20% to be a top stack. So both you and I are going to be in agreement here. The Chiefs look really good. And then we just talked about the Chiefs defense and all of the ownership that's going towards them. Now, here's where I think things get interesting because at first, I don't want to make assumptions. Do you like the Chiefs as well?
I do.
Okay. Do we want to do Chiefs run backs, and how would that change the outlook of that lineup, number one, from an upside perspective, and then also from a leverage perspective when you consider how many people are going to be playing the Chiefs? Because if you're doing a run back, then obviously you're not playing the Chiefs defense in that lineup. So you're getting an opportunity to potentially create more upside for the Chiefs offense while also getting leverage off of their defense. We don't usually think of tournaments in terms of leverage in this kind of way, but this is kind of a unique situation. So I want to know what you think about that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting idea to do a run back. I think I'm not going to force it. My guess is what I'll do is we've talked about this before. We go on Fantasy Cruncher, put in, Patrick Mahomes, lock him in as your key player, and then boost up those Rams offensive players. And anybody you have any interest in on the other side of it. I mean, the Chiefs defense is not incredible, 20th against the pass, 19th against the rush. So if this Rams team is going to be able to score at all the rest without Stafford, maybe this would be a spot where they will be able to. So I think I'm not going to force it, but I probably will at least give a boost to those Rams. The Cam Akers and I don't know who are playing from the Rams this week. Cam Akers, no Cooper Kupp. I guess Tyler Higbee will be an interesting one if he's playing. I think he's also questionable last I checked. Yeah. So I'm not going to force it. I will allow it. And that's a good point because of, on a main slate, I'm allowing 0 offensive players versus my defense. So if you do a run back, then you're naturally not playing the Chiefs defense and getting some leverage on people who are playing the Chiefs defense. And in general, people don't want to play the defense of their quarterback because there is negative correlation, playing Patrick Mahomes with the Chiefs defense. Because if the Chiefs defense does have a pick six, that's obviously going to hurt Mahomes' chances. He's going to get the ball less and also be in a worse game script for passing. So maybe because people don't want to do it, it's a spot where you can gain a little bit by playing the Chiefs defense with Patrick Mahomes. But also, as I said, there is still negative leverage, and that's why the field doesn't want to do it.
Yeah. And there is literally no ownership on any of these Rams wide receivers right now. We've got Skoranek, Allen Robinson, Van Jefferson. These guys are all projected for 1% ownership. We still are going to need an update on Tyler Higbee. And I know the situation is shitty for the Rams offense. That's why everybody wants to play the Chiefs defense. But at the same time, too, if this is a game where the Chiefs are up by a massive amount, you have to think it sets up well for some sort of garbage time for the Rams in that game. So I don't mind some of the cheap run backs in that spot to really differentiate a Chiefs stack. The number one already looks to be under-owned, but also I think leverage to be had by playing some of the other side. So those were, to me, were the two biggest talking points at quarterback in the stack spot, looking at Tua and then Mahomes as well, and then the potential run backs there. So I want to ask, how are you handling some of the other quarterbacks outside of Mahomes, outside of Tua? Who are the other priorities for you at the position?
I mean, Justin Herbert looks good against the Cardinals, coming in 8% projected ownership, 11% chance of being the top stack. It's a pretty good spot against the Cardinals defense. Actually, they're much better against the pass now than they were early. No, sorry, they're reading this wrong. Still 22nd against the pass in terms of DVOA. So still a great spot for the Chargers. They have a 25.5 implied team total, one of the best on the slate. So I think that makes sense. Justin Herbert being a spot that we're going to want to go to. I have some interest in Tom Brady against this Browns defense coming off a bye week. Browns 27th in terms of pass DVOA, 32nd in rush DVOA. The Bucs have a 23 implied team total. I think I'll be playing some Tom Brady. We have him coming in at 5.6% projected ownership, only 5.1% chance to be in the top stack, but then a 6.6% chance to be in the top value stack. I think it's an interesting spot against a very bad Cleveland defense. So that's somewhere I might go. I'm always willing to play some Joe Burrow. I just think that that offense in Cincinnati always has a chance to go off. Now we've got no Jamar Chase, makes it a little bit easier to know who you want to go to in T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, maybe Hayden Hurst. We have Joe Burrow projected for 7.3% ownership, 7.7% chance of being the top stack. So, slight positive leverage there. That's a spot that I'm interested in. I really want to play this Seattle Las Vegas game. It just looks like a game that could be really juicy. It is a little bit tough that the field is going there a decent amount. Yeah. Seattle, we've got Geno Smith coming in at 12.6% ownership, 7.9% chance of being the top stack. So that's the downside of it. I still think you can obviously play it. You just need to get contrarian elsewhere. You're not getting contrarian with the stack if you play Geno Smith. And then on the other side of it, Derek Carr coming in at 6.1% projected ownership, 5.4% chance of being the top stack. I still think, once again, that's a spot you can go. Obviously pair him with Devonta Adams. So those are a few of the spots that jump out at me. Any others that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so I think that you hit on some of the biggest ones. I wanted to ask you about Geno Smith and his ownership. I'm going to most likely end up coming in underweight to that spot in a pretty big way, unless the numbers were to change here or the ownership or something, because at least as of now, we've got Geno Smith as the most owned quarterback on all of DK, projected for 12.6% ownership. And then over on FanDuel also, he's projected to be 12.1% owned. So the most popular player on both sites at the position right now. And it's not to say he projects poorly for us. We have the Seahawks as being one of the higher top stack teams. It's just not quite the same level of some of these other quarterbacks. One thing that I do think is pretty interesting from an ownership perspective, everybody's played Justin Fields a ton. in recent weeks. And now there's some uncertainty with his injury status. Now it appears to be very much up in the air. He's officially listed as questionable, and it seems reports are indicating it's a little bit of uphill sledding for him to play. But we've got Justin Fields, who's just been crushing as of late and is not projected for ownership because some of the injury concerns. 2% right now on FanDuel, only 5% over on DraftKings. Now, a lot of this, like I said, is due to the injury, and that could definitely change some of the numbers that we have for the situation. But if we're actually going to get a low-owned Justin Fields for a change, that would have to be pretty appealing to me because we've seen the kind of upside he has.
Yeah, I suppose that is, you would have to consider it. Obviously, the Jets are a tough defense, so it's not the same as playing against the Lions and the Falcons that he's had in the past couple weeks. It's a much tougher spot against the Jets. So if he does come in at under 5% owned, if they ruled him in and he was under 5% owned, then I think sure I might have some interest. My expectation would be that if he is ruled in tomorrow morning, that number is going to come up to 10% or so, and at 10%. He's less interesting to me just because of the matchup with the Jets. Still sort of interesting at 10%. Maybe I'd throw him in a lineup or two, but not going to be somebody that I love having a ton of if he gets up at higher ownership. But I agree with you. If the ownership stays low, which it could, because a lot of people don't really react to news that comes out on Sunday. So I do think that there is some possibility that it stays relatively suppressed. In that case, yeah, I think he would be interesting.
Yeah, and overall, though, I do have to say that just based on some of our ownership in the top stack odds, it's pretty concentrated this week. And this would be one of the weeks that I'm a little bit tighter with my stacks, I think, just based on some of the numbers when, between Miami, Kansas City, and the Chargers, I mean, those three teams are combined to make up about 50% of our top stack odds for the weeks. And all three are under owned. So, I mean, that's probably going to make up the bulk of my lineups. I wouldn't be getting that crazy at quarterback this week. Is there anything really contrarian that it sounds like you got the people showed up your ass? Because I think I hear the dog bark in the back.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody must have showed up. Yes, he is. He can get a little bit loud. Yeah. Maybe who's even plays? Is Taylor Heineke playing? Is he the quarterback for Washington right now? I need to pull up my. Hang on. We're seeing some positive numbers. Spot obviously in against Atlanta. But let me, before I talk about it, I want to make sure I know who is actually the quarterback that I'm talking about here. Yeah, so it is Taylor Heineke.
Yeah. So what's funny about Taylor Heineke is he hasn't played well as the starting quarterback for the Commanders, but the defense has been really good. So he gets to keep his job. It's like, look, we're winning. He gets to keep the job. It's like, well, is he playing that much better than Carson Wentz? It's neither here nor there because he's going to be the quarterback for DFS purposes. I just think it's funny how much weight is given to quarterback wins, even when it has nothing to do with them whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's the dumbest stat out there. But if he's playing, I still think that against Atlanta, he will be an interesting play. You can maybe, I would maybe consider even single stacking Taylor Heineke. You could double stack him, but he has a little bit of rushing upside. But it also helps that you just know that he likes throwing the ball so much to McLaurin. So it's just makes it a little bit easier to just, throw Heineke out there with McLaurin in a good spot against the Falcons. I think that you still could double stack them, I think, with Curtis Samuel or Logan Thomas or something, but he's at least a viable single stack as well with Taylor Heineke, with Terry McLaurin and with his rushing upside. So I think that's kind of an interesting contrarian spot coming in at 2.7% projected ownership. We only have him the top stack 2.5% of the time, but then again, top value stack 4.9% of the time. So the fact that he's a little bit cheaper makes it a little bit of a more interesting play.
Yeah, and for me, I don't really have too much else to talk about at the quarterback spot. Like I said, I'm going to be more concentrated than I will in other weeks. We've got really high top stack odds on a few spots without much ownership. Tua, Mahomes, and then also adding Justin Herbert to mix. That's going to be where I go and build a lot of my stacks around for this weekend. Should we tell these people how to make some free money as well, Neil? Do you think that might be of interest to them?
I don't think it's possible to make free money, Greg. Try.
It is if you sign up at BetMGM. You click on the link that we have below, and it'll get thrown into the YouTube chat as well. And if you guys don't have a BetMGM account, you click on the link to sign up. When you place a $10 money line bet on any World Cup soccer game, it's going to pay out $200. Now, it says on the landing page when you click on the link, it says as long as a goal is scored, but it means as long as a goal is scored for the entirety of the World Cup. There's already been a goal scored in the World Cup, so you're going to place that $10 money line bet, and regardless of whether the team you bet on wins or loses, it pays out $200 because that is the deal that BetMGM has set up. Just make sure to click on the link when you sign up because you're going to need to click that link to get credited with your free money when you sign up. Let's move on over to the running back position and some interesting chalk at the spot. So last weekend, we didn't really see any predominant running back chalk. It was pretty spread out at the position. Once again, though, we're getting to some spots this weekend where we're seeing the field really gravitate towards. That would be Jeff Wilson Jr. and Rachaad White, both of them projected to pick up a massive amount of ownership. So starting with these two, and I guess we'll start with Jeff Wilson because he's a little bit more popular. He's projected for 34% ownership, where we've got Rachaad White for 32%. Starting with Wilson, do you think all the chalk on him is warranted?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great spot for Jeff Wilson with Raheem Mostert out, going up against the Texans defense that is 31st against the rush. The Dolphins, as we talked about with Tua, that's my one concern with playing Tua is the Dolphins should be able to handle the Texans pretty easily. And if they're up, in the second half, they're probably going to be more inclined to run the ball a lot. I think Jeff Wilson's a talented running back. Just needs the opportunity. Now he's got the backfield to himself in a spot where they're 14-point favorites. It's a great spot for Jeff Wilson. Looking at the boom bust tool, yeah, he looks a little bit overowned. So we've got him at 34% projected ownership, 24% chance of being optimal, 23% chance of booming. But again, just because he's a little bit overowned doesn't mean that you can't play him. It just means, he's not a spot where you're getting different by playing Jeff Wilson, but you're going to need to get different elsewhere in your lineup. But he still looks great. I don't know that I'm going to be getting to the field if the field is at 34%, but I still think I'm going to have him in a good number of lineups. How do you feel about Jeff Wilson?
He's overowned. I think he's a really strong option. But with that said, he might be one of my most rostered running backs. That means he's in 20% of my lineups, which means that I'd have him, almost half of what the field has based on what his current ownership is. And it's a little bit more muted ownership for Wilson and Rachaad White over on FanDuel, both still popular, but 22% on FanDuel as compared to being 34 and 32% on DK. But, at least as of right now, we have them being the two most optimal running back plays on the slate. But that means Jeff Wilson is in at 24% of the time, Rachaad White 28% of the time. So White being the other chalky play here, I think you make a really good case for both of them. And this is a tournament show, but if people are playing cash games, I think both of us would say that these guys are terrific points per dollar plays, and they would be two of the better cash options on the slate. And for tournaments, there's obvious upside as well. I just don't think that I'm willing to get to them quite as much as the field is. And then something else to consider too with Tampa Bay is I know that Rachaad White is now cemented or supposedly cemented as the starting running back. I don't know that means that he gets 100% of the touches. It could still be Keyshawn Vaughn, who's going to be in the mix as well. So if I'm picking between the two, I do prefer Rachaad White to Jeff Wilson. He's cheaper. Also, the ownership is slightly lower. Optimal odds are a little bit higher. So I think the ownership is closer to correct on Rachaad White. Jeff Wilson, to me, good play, but just a little bit too popular. Where do you stand with Rachaad White? And maybe if you were picking between the two, would you have a lean?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. My lean would be to Rachaad White over Jeff Wilson. But I think they're both pretty great plays. I think, both look a little bit overowned if you look in our boom bust tool. So, maybe I don't get to the 32% that the field is at, but honestly, I haven't made my lineups yet. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be under the weight to the field on these guys. Kind of depends on whether anybody else stands out to me as I make a lineups. I do think that they both make really interesting plays. I think that, all three of Jeff Wilson, Rachaad White, Kenneth Walker are good chalk to me. Those three are all good chalk. That doesn't mean that, they're not going overowned. We have Rachaad White coming in at 32% ownership, 28% optimal. So it looks like he's going a little bit overowned, but he's only 5,100. Like, it would be tough, I think, for Rachaad White to totally bust. I mean, we see it happen pretty regularly. Guys in great spots put up 5 fantasy points, but I think that I think that he has a pretty safe floor at 5,100, pretty safe to pay off that price tag. Whether he puts up a need to have it scored, that's another question. But again, it's a great spot against the Browns defense that is 32nd in terms of rush DVOA, worst defense in the league against the rush. He's 5,100. He is the lead back. No Leonard Fournette this week. I mean, sure, yeah, they can bring in other players, but I do think they were already trending toward Rachaad White being the starter in Tampa Bay. I think that he's more talented than Leonard Fournette. So with Leonard Fournette out, I expect that he's going to get a good number of touches in this game against a terrible defense at just 5,100. So I do think that despite being a little bit overowned in terms of his optimal odds, I think that he's a very solid play.
I think we also have good pivot plays. There's a lot of players in this kind of mid-range that I think if this was a week earlier, these are guys that just the field would have been on in a really big way because everybody gravitates towards the newest thing. Remember when Deontay Foreman was the guy that everybody had to play running back? He was crazy popular. Well, all right, he's had a couple of bad games now, but all of a sudden, he's the same price as these guys. You got Deontay Foreman is $5,500. on DK. He is $6,700 on FanDuel. Nobody's playing him this weekend. It's the same scenario he was in a few weeks ago. He's not coming off a big game, and these other guys are in new spots. I think Foreman is a really good pivot play to get to, who I don't think should be massively different looking than Jeff Wilson or on paper to Rachaad White. Sure, those guys project a little bit better, but it's not like there's a massive chasm between them. So that's where I think there are some good pivot plays, like guys like Deontay Foreman, Travis Etienne, Isaiah Pacheco. These are guys that are also, I view as being in good spots that the field just isn't getting to because everybody's playing the same couple of backs.
Yeah, that's a good point. As I'm looking at the backs in that range, there are a number of interesting options. The three that you just brought up, and then you can throw in Antonio Gibson with no JD McKissick in a great spot against Atlanta. That's really interesting to me. Michael Carter, we don't really know whether Mike White threw to his running backs every time when he started last year because he had no receivers. There's been some discourse about this on Twitter. Like, was it just a function of the Jets didn't have any good receivers, so he threw it to his running backs 37 times over 3 games or whatever it was when he started. But we do know that is what happened when we've seen Mike White in the past. He just targets his running backs a ton. So 5,400 Michael Carter becomes really interesting. So there are some good pivot options as we're looking at this. And, I talked about Antonio Gibson, obviously Brian Robinson in that same spot at 5,100 coming in at 1.4% ownership. Also kind of interesting. So I am with you. We have other interesting options on this slate. So maybe I will come in under the field on these running backs, even though, as I said, I think they are good chalk. Jeff Wilson, Rachaad White, Kenneth Walker even all look like good chalk to me. But with all these pivot options, I'll probably come in underweight.
Yeah, and by the way, because should probably mention also the reason that so many people are gravitating towards Rachaad White right now is that Leonard Fournette is injured. He's not expected to play, hasn't officially been ruled out, but there's kind of reports also leading up to this that Rachaad White could be taking over as the starting running back. He officially started last week, but the carries were kind of split there. But with Leonard Fournette out this week, or at least presumed out, that's why the Rachaad White ownership is getting to where it is. But the one that I really do like the best of the names I just mentioned there is Travis Etienne, because something really weird happened with him this week where the Jaguars went out and signed Darrell Henderson. And one thing I thought was pretty interesting about that is pretty immediately his rushing props dropped by like 5-6 yards. And then we get news the next day that Henderson isn't even going to play this week. I don't know why it matters. So maybe this is an indication moving forward that they don't want to give Etienne quite the same workload they have to this point. But what does it matter for this week when Henderson isn't even going to play? They signed a guy who's presumably going to be a backup running back, but he is inactive. Nothing should have changed about this situation, but the ownership has dropped. His rushing props have dropped. They might have come back up this morning, but I think that Etienne's just getting overlooked. This was a guy who was one of the most popular backs on the slate for like a month. Every Sunday he was massively chalky. So he's in the same price range. He's only $800 more expensive than Jeff Wilson. Another guy I think is getting overlooked.
Yeah, it's an interesting play for sure. Ravens, not the best spot in the world, but also not the worst spot to target for a running back. They're 14th against the rush. So just a pretty middling defense against running backs. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that the Darrell Henderson signing really affects anything in terms of how much they're going to be using Travis Etienne. It might mean that they're just not satisfied with JaMychal Hasty. We don't even know, like, if he were active, how much it would actually impact Travis Etienne. But I think, yeah, Travis Etienne, we're expecting a pretty great workload there against the Ravens. The Jaguars do have a 20 implied team total. We have Etienne at 11.3% projected ownership, 15.3% chance of being optimal. So pretty nice positive leverage there. I'm with you. 6,700. The price looks right.
Yeah, and then over on FanDuel, by the way, only a $300 difference between Etienne and Jeff Wilson Jr. And even there, we've got Jeff Wilson picking up more than twice the ownership. So I think that's a good pivot play to be had right there. The way a lot of people are rostering their running backs this weekend, Neil, is it's really that mid-range we talked about, where Jeff Wilson, Rachaad White, these guys are picking up the most ownership in both DraftKings and FanDuel. As a result, nobody really seems to be paying up at the running back spot. Austin Eckler's picking up a little bit of ownership over on FanDuel. But as far as DraftKings is concerned, also a little bit of ownership going Eckler. But guys like Derrick Henry not picking up ownership, Christian McCaffrey, sub 10% on both DraftKings and FanDuel. Are you looking to pay up to be contrarian at all this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry looks really interesting. 8,300. We've got him projected for 11% ownership, 15.5% chance of being optimal. I think, Derrick Henry obviously is always live to put up 100 and a couple touchdowns. Bengals defense 16th against the rush, so not the best spot. Another middling defense. Derrick Henry can do it against any defense. So I think Derrick Henry is going to be interesting at 8,300. Christian McCaffrey also fairly interesting against the Saints. They are 20th against the rush, so a decent spot for Christian McCaffrey. Coming in a little bit lower on because he has been splitting a little bit with Eli Mitchell, but he's still getting 7 targets a game. He's still getting plenty of opportunities, and he is one of maybe the most talented running back in the world. 8% projected ownership, 15% chance of being optimal. Christian McCaffrey again looks like a great play. So yeah, paying up to be contrarian makes a lot of sense this week. Austin Eckler we can throw in there, coming in at 16% ownership, 15% chance of being optimal. So slightly overowned, but essentially neutral, and obviously another guy that you can throw in there if you're wanting to pay up a little bit. And then Josh Jacobs again, 14% ownership, 14% chance of being optimal. So it's not really a spot where you're gaining anything on the field by playing him, but certainly very interesting at 7,700 as well against Seattle.
And then one other popular running back that we should talk about before moving on to some of the more contrarian options, Samaje Perine. Joe Mixon is out. So Perine, 3 touchdowns last week. And what happened was Joe Mixon ends up getting concussed, wasn't able to finish the game. By the end of the year, Mixon is going to be like a top 5 fantasy running back with 70% of his points scored in that one game where he just went absolutely bonkers. But Samaje Perine now, another piece, not quite as popular as Jeff Wilson or as Rachaad White, but still one of the more popular backs on the slate. And also somebody that we have being very negatively leveraged. We have him as being, I think, the most overowned player on the entire slate on both DraftKings and FanDuel. So Perine, he does score better for DraftKings purpose than FanDuel because of the PPR upside. But it doesn't look like we're projecting him to be the sole guy in the backfield. It looks like we're expecting somewhat of a time split, which is why Perine not projecting quite as well for us. But what do you make of Perine, who has been priced up a little bit, but is in a prominent spot with Mixon out?
Yeah, so I don't like him as much as the other options in that range, just because, as you said, 18% projected ownership. Obviously, he projects okay for 5,600. He projects well enough that 18% of the field is going there. You can play some Samaje Perine, but he is largely going to be a fade for me. I'm certainly going to be under the field if the field's getting to 18%. We have him optimal 7% of the time, facing the number 1 defense in the league against the rush in the Titans. So it's just not a great spot for Perine. The Bengals have a pretty 23 implied team total is pretty good, but it's a tough spot to run the ball, especially my guess is they'll be throwing it more. Of course, Perine pretty good in the passing game, could be targeted, have an outlier game where he gets 8 targets and catches 7 balls, something like that. But in general, it's just not a great spot for Perine. So given all of the alternative options in the price range, I'd rather just go to somebody who's getting less than 18% ownership.
And then are there any contrarian options we haven't talked about? I've already brought up a lot of my favorites, Etienne, Deontay Foreman. You brought up Gibson. I'm on board with him. These are a lot of players. Pacheco is another one I mentioned that I like. So I'm going to be making some pivots where some of those really chalky running backs, I'll be underweight to them. And I think trying to get to some of these guys a little more frequently. Is there anybody else that stands out to you that either you want to highlight that we've talked about or maybe that we haven't mentioned that we should talk about here?
Not really. I think that we've talked about all of the most interesting options at running back. Just trying to go through and see if we did miss anybody that stands out to me. And nobody's really jumping off the page at me. Kamara has a little bit of positive leverage, 2.3% ownership, 2.9% optimal, but not my favorite place to go on this slate. We talked about Michael Carter. Again, I think he's interesting just because it is a pretty volatile spot. We just don't know if this is going to continue to be Mike White's tendency to just throw the ball to the running back a ton. If he does, then 5,400 Michael Carter at 3.5% ownership is going to look great. We actually have a little bit of negative leverage on Michael Carter, but I do think that's a little bit fragile just because it is a really unknown situation. We don't know how many targets he's likely to get in this spot. But I do think I just want to hit on that again, that I think Michael Carter is pretty interesting. But no, I think that we've largely covered. I guess Jerick McKinnon with CEH out now is probably more heavily involved in that rotation at 4,700. You could consider Jerick McKinnon at 1.2% ownership, but I don't even love Isaiah Pacheco. It's a tough spot to run the ball for Kansas City. They're probably going to be more likely to throw it. But you consider both Pacheco and Jerick McKinnon with no CEH are at least somewhat interested. The Rams are 5th against the rush and 26th against the pass, so very much a pass funnel defense. And obviously the Chiefs want to pass the ball anyway, but if they get up a ton in the first half, then they're going to be running it with somebody. So you consider both those guys as well.
So Neil and I are doing the show on a Saturday, which means yesterday was Black Friday, Monday, Cyber Monday, and in honor of these big American holidays, the sales holidays, what America is really built on around here, we've got our biggest deal going on as well. Because if you sign up using the promo code THANKS over at Stokastic right now, you could get 5 weeks of all of the tools we have for every single DFS sport out there, 1 week for $5. So all you have to do is sign up and use the promo code THANKS at checkout, or just click on the link that's going to be thrown into the YouTube chat. It's also available below in the description box below this YouTube video. $5 for 1 week of all of our tools. It is the best deal out there right now in DFS. Although also DraftKings was giving away a lot of good stuff if you checked out the Dynasty Reward Store. Did you use any of your crowns on anything, Neil?
I spend my crowns on playing DFS, so I don't have any crowns to spend.
Okay, I went. I did all my holiday shopping in the Dynasty Reward Store.
Oh yeah, what'd you get for everybody? Or are they listening?
So I'd say the thing that I was most excited to purchase. My dad needs a new TV, so I got an 86-inch TV in the DK Dynasty Store because everything is 50% off for the holiday. So it's pretty good also because the stuff is already marked down with the deals they have with the different stuff. So you get like a lot of cool stuff for relative, not a lot of price. And then even stuff like Amazon gift cards are 50% off. So that's also kind of weird because you get $500 Amazon gift cards for not a lot of crowns. So yeah. That's what you should be saving your money for, Neil. Don't play it in those contests. Wait for Black Friday. That's the only thing I'm ever going to use crowns on from now on.
Yeah, you definitely. I'm gonna have to keep that in mind next year because that does seem like a no-brainer kind of deal. Actually, before we move on to wide receivers, can I just touch on a few that running backs that came up in chat? So Latavius Murray, Andrew Martinez brought up. It is interesting, they dropped Melvin Gordon. Latavius Murray now in a pretty good spot against the Panthers, who are 21st against the rush. The reason that we didn't bring him up as one of our favorite plays is he's also getting a little bit of projected ownership, 14% ownership, 18% chance of being optimal. So I think that he is a fine play. Like he probably will get the bulk of the carries against a pretty bad defense. So I do think Latavius Murray is in play. I would put him in kind of the same bucket as P. Ryan, where he's not my favorite chalk piece, but I do think that he's in play. Actually, I think I prefer him to P. Ryan if I'm playing one of those guys. I think I'd rather go to Latavius Murray. Somebody else had brought up Kieran Williams. I think you could go there. 4,900 against the Chiefs, only coming in at 0.5% projected ownership. With Darrell Henderson now gone, he might be. They haven't been able to move the ball at all with Cam Akers this year, so maybe they want to give Kieran Williams a chance. I have played crazier plays. I think that Kieran Williams is somebody you could consider. And then somebody else asked about Nick Chubb, whether we'd pay up there. He's not my favorite pay up spot, but certainly I think Nick Chubb is always in play. 2.9% projected ownership, 1.5% chance of being optimal. The Browns playing against the Bucs defense that is a little bit tough. So it's not my favorite spot for Nick Chubb, but he's the kind of running back who can do it against any defense. So I think that it's a fine play.
I can't imagine that would get to Kyron Williams just because there's so many other running backs that are fairly low owned. As far as the Rams go, if I'm going to be looking for leverage on the Chiefs defense, I think I'm more apt to go to some of the unowned wide receivers. It's just hard for me with Kyron Williams, especially because the running back situation has been such a mess for the Rams. Remember, Cam Akers was, 4 weeks ago? The Cam Akers was sent away from the team. They said he would never going to be back. Then all of a sudden he comes back and Darrell Henderson's gone. Henderson was supposed to be the workhorse after the Cam Akers scenario. So I don't know what to make of it. They had, Ronnie Rivers they've had in the mix at points in time too. They called him up from the practice squad, then he went down. It's just been a really difficult scenario for me to parse. So I'll probably be avoiding that one. And then same as far as Nick Chubb as a pay up option, I just very rarely pay up for Nick Chubb. He's so dependent on scoring touchdowns. I'd rather play guys like Derrick Henry or Christian McCaffrey, who are also not picking up that much ownership this week. They just feel better about the projections on. So I think maybe you can make more of a case for Nick Chubb when you're using him to pivot off of other high-owned wide receivers or highly priced wide receivers. When those other guys that just project better are also low-owned, I'd rather go there. But I understand the want to get there for sure. Let's move over to the wide receiver position. One thing that's kind of interesting to me, Neil, is that for all of the ownership that we have that's going towards Tyreek Hill right now, we're not really seeing that much going to Tua. So we mentioned before, Tua is one of our favorite low-owned plays to roster in tournaments. He's only projected for 10% ownership. But yet Tyreek Hill north of 20% ownership, by far the most popular pay-up option we have at wideout this weekend. How do you like him on the high end?
Yeah, I mean, he looks great. It's obviously the same concerns that I had with Tua apply to Tyreek Hill just as much. Just they might not want to be throwing the ball. It's riskier to throw the ball in general if you can just run on the team, the opposing defense. A lot of teams might just opt in that spot to just run the ball more because it's a little bit less risky than throwing the ball. So we have that concern that it's just they're not going to need to throw the ball a ton, but still, we've got Tyreek Hill, 21% projected ownership, 23% chance of being optimal. He has been just great just about every game this year. And they also, maybe they have the added incentive of, I think Tyreek Hill is chasing some records here this season. So maybe they continue to, maybe that does factor into their play calling a little bit. So I think, 8,800 is a high price tag, but I think that it's warranted for Tyreek Hill. He's been so good just about every game this year. I would still expect that they're going to continue to throw the ball at least for, 3 quarters. So I like Tyreek Hill. I think he makes a lot of sense. Talk about Jalen Waddle at the same time, 10.6% projected ownership, 14.3% chance of being optimal at 7,300. So nice price discount. And Jalen Waddle obviously also has the huge spike potential and relatively high floor. So I think both those guys look great. And obviously, as we've said, you can throw them in with just throw the quarterback in, make it a stack, and it becomes a low owned combo. So I assume you see it the same way I do. Both these guys, very interesting.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, too. These are going to be maybe my two most roster wide receivers, my two most rostered quarterback. They all correlate really well. I don't have any concerns at this point about Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill being negatively leveraged or negatively correlated. It just doesn't matter. When the Dolphins passing game is racking up a lot of yards, the ball doesn't go to other guys. It's very doable for Waddle and Tyreek Hill to both have big games. By the way, piece of news that just came across. Nathan Peterman elevated to the Bears active roster. I love when we get a Nathan Peterman sighting. To me, that's a pretty good indication that Justin Fields is not going to be playing tomorrow.
Probably, yeah.
You only bring Nathan Peterman up to the big leagues in severe emergency scenarios. Peterman, do you remember the game where he had, I think it was 6 interceptions and a half?
Oh man, that's fun.
Are
we just locking the Jets defense this week? Maybe that's the play. Just lock the Jets defense if it's Nathan Peterman.
Well, I don't think he's going to start. I just think he's on the active roster. But I'm pretty sure Nathan Peterman had a game. It was either like 4 or 5 or 6 interceptions and a half. Let me look this up. Interceptions and a half. Nathan Peterman. What was it? Yeah, here it was. Nathan Peterman threw 5 interceptions in the first half. Did not play the second half. Very, very. Don't you let him go for the record at this point?
You got to give him the record.
Yeah, you got to give him a chance for the record. You don't take him out after that. Yeah, I guess that's one of the reasons it's a really difficult record to destroy, because you could only suck so much before you come out of the game. Let him finish the game. Let him go for history. Getting back to some of the other wide receivers, at the high end, I love getting to Tyreek Hill. I love getting to Jalen Waddle. Are there any other pay-up wide receivers that you have your eye on for Sunday?
Yeah, let me sort by salary. So obviously both those guys. Devonta Adams, we actually have pretty negative leverage on Devonta Adams. I still think that he's always in play in a great spot against the Seahawks. It's a great matchup. I think the 8,600 price tag obviously pretty high, but Devonta Adams always live to break the slate, so I think he's a fine play. DeAndre Hopkins just gets so many targets every game, no matter who is in at quarterback for Arizona. So I'm always going to like DeAndre Hopkins, 16.5% projected ownership, 13% chance of being optimal. We've got Jamar Chase out now, so T. Higgins is going to be interesting. He's going to be pretty high owned at 6,900, but without Jamar Chase, he's a pretty clear wide receiver 1 for the Bengals. So T. Higgins going to be pretty interesting. Talked about how much I like playing some Bucks stacks. And Mike Evans, we've got coming in at 7% projected ownership, 10% chance of being optimal. So definitely a spot that you can go to, 6,700 Mike Evans. I'd say those are the primary places that stick out to me, players that I want to play. Is Debo, I thought there was some injury with Debo Samuel. Maybe I'm misremembering this. I thought there was something going on, but
I believe he's officially questionable on the injury report. Let me see if that has since changed.
He's got a hamstring.
I want to say he was questionable but practiced and is expected to play.
Okay.
That was the last I had saw. But I think the official injury report still has him as questionable.
Yep.
Here we go. So according to Dave Lombardi, Samuel is listed as questionable for Sunday's game against the Saints. Missed week 8 with a hamstring injury. Returned the week 9 bye. Didn't have any limitations at practice. So
okay.
I mean, the fact that he was able to practice in full on Friday, usually an indication that he's going to play. So one thing that's a little annoying about the NFL pivoting, getting rid of the doubtful, getting rid of the probable tag, just moving anybody to questionable, is now anybody with any kind of injury ends up being questionable. So you kind of have to parse what's questionable, what's actually questionable.
Yeah.
I would be pretty surprised if Debo doesn't play this weekend.
Yeah, it sounds like he's going to play. So, I mean, Debo is going to be in play. We've got him at 6.5% ownership, 6.5% optimal. Obviously, very talented. There are a lot of mouths to feed in San Francisco. I believe, did we just see a double touchdown game from both Ayuk and Kittle in the last one, or am I misremembering? Either way, there's just so many mouths to feed in San Francisco, but I think that they're all viable because they're all coming in relatively low ownership. Ayuk, 1.5% ownership, 2.7% chance of being optimal, also looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that we've got a lot of interesting options here. Keenan Allen getting a little bit of chalk, but I think it's warranted. 19.9% projected ownership, 19.3% optimal. I guess we're getting down in the range now that we're not talking about the high end. We're talking the mid end. So yeah, we've gone through all the high ends that I'm interested in.
Which we could talk about some of the mid end guys, and Keenan Allen looks like he's back and healthy for the Chargers. Chris Godwin. These to me look like the players we want to get to the most in the mid range. The ones that are projecting the best for us are Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, Josh Palmer, if we want to throw him into the mix. Terry McLaurin, you mentioned him before, somebody who now that we have Heineke is more locked in as a starting quarterback. It does seem like we get more targets going to McLaurin with Heineke as the quarterback as opposed to when Carson Wentz was the QB. And then we've also got Juju Smith-Schuster. He's back and healthy. Those are the guys that I just rattled off right there that I think are my core plays at the mid-range for wide receiver. I want to know who are the guys that stand out the most to you in that, like 5 to 6K-ish range.
Yeah, no, I think that you named a lot of them. Tyler Lockett, I don't know if you mentioned him, but certainly interesting. If you're going to play some Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett obviously makes sense. 6,200, 13% projected ownership, 12% chance of being optimal. So a little bit of negative leverage on Tyler Lockett. Chris Godwin, again, talked about how much I like those Brady stacks. I think you can include Chris Godwin in those. He's just 6K, 14.5% projected ownership, 17% chance of being optimal. As you mentioned, Terry McLaurin, everybody's noticing that Heineke likes to throw him the ball, but you throw Heineke in, once again, it's a combo that's not going to be used a ton because Heineke is not going to get a lot of ownership, and it's not that expensive. McLaurin even is only 5,800. So certainly think that McLaurin is in play here. Juju coming in at just 7.4% ownership, 11.3% chance of being optimal. We talked about how much we like playing that Kansas City stack, and Mahomes not getting a ton of ownership. Now we have we're missing Mecole Hardman, and now we are also missing, who is it? Somebody else.
Kadarius Toney.
Kadarius Toney is also out. Yeah. So
of course, I missed that. Sorry to cut you off, but missed opportunity here on Kadarius Toney. I've realized it in hindsight. Anytime he was I love Kadarius Toney's upside. I think for particularly for DFS tournaments, a lot of upside. Anytime he's active, I should have just been betting alternate unders on the totals for receiving yard prop, knowing that there's probably a 40% chance that he gets hurt on the first series of the game, because that's happened crazy enough more often than not. I'm sure there's probably been crazy odds on Kadarius Toney, like under 25.5 receiving yards, because it seems like he just can't stay on the field. But to bring this into your point, and also because I brought up Juju as well, he's the pretty unquestioned number one wide receiver for the Chiefs right now. And so I assume I'm going to end up with a lot of Mahomes, Juju, Kelsey stacks, and I'm totally cool with that. So Juju, it seems like he's all good to go after getting knocked out in the concussion the other week. So I really do like him as well. Cheap wide receivers. Any players that you view as being good options in the punt / really low value type range?
Yeah, so I have some breaking news, some insider info that even you are probably not, you might be privy to this information, Greg, but you might not be. So we know that all year, Eric Lindquist has been talking about MVS this, MVS that. He's going to break out. He's going to be so amazing this year. And MVS has not done it all year. Well, I know that just yesterday, Eric Lindquist cut MVS from his Stokastic
God.
League team. So now I think that MVS is like assuredly going to get 25 plus fantasy points, and he's just 4,000. So just add in the Eric Lindquist drop for reasons to play MVS this week. He's coming in at 4.9% ownership, 8% chance of being optimal. But once you factor in the Eric Lindquist drop, I think that it's like 30% chance of being optimal here. I think that it's just one of those things that's guaranteed to happen now that he finally gave up on him.
Yeah, so Eric, one of my best friends in the world, who I do a lot of shows with, I thought you were going to be breaking news to me, and I thought that all of it was going to lead to you being like, and Eric's an idiot, like, and I thought that was going to be the end here. But no, it's just he's not on the team. So just for the purpose of Eric being on the wrong side of MVS in every single week this entire year, it would be pretty sweet if this was the week he went off. I'm not, by the way, not actually anything that I would put into any kind of analysis, but the data, by the way, does back up MVS quite a bit, and from the standpoint also. We already have said we like Patrick Mahomes a lot. We like the Chiefs offense, particularly for FanDuel purposes. This is the number one stack in our top stacks tool. For DraftKings purposes, still the number two stack. And MVS, we've got him being 4% owned, 8% chance to be optimal. So for sure, on a value standpoint, that makes sense, especially when you consider what happens if we're going to be playing Kelsey, who I don't want to spoil anything, but I'm going to like Travis Kelce when we get to tight end. If we like Kelsey, we like Mahomes, you need to save money at some point in that lineup. MVS is a way to do that while also saving or at least alternating your lineup a lot from the more popular plays, because it does look like he's going to be pretty contrarian at wide receiver. A player who's not going to be as contrarian wide receiver that's around the same price point, Garrett Wilson. He's expected to be the most popular value play on the slate, coming in just south of 20% ownership over on DK. And then for FanDuel purposes, Garrett Wilson, a little bit less popular, but still 10% owned and still a pretty good looking cheap wide receiver over there. What do you make of a chalky Garrett Wilson over on DraftKings and then a cheap but slightly less popular Garrett Wilson on FanDuel?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. So they're playing against the Bears, who are 30th against the pass, 25th against the rush. The Jets actually have a 22.25 implied team total. It's a little bit tough, like to want to play the chalk with Mike White coming in to start the game for the Jets, to play one of his receivers where it's like just kind of an unknown situation. It's tough to really want to, but Garrett Wilson is very talented and he's just 4,300 and it's a great matchup with the Bears. So the field getting there at 19%, we actually have him optimal 22% of the time. So I think the chalk makes some sense. It is certainly, it scares me a little bit that we have Mike White starting and we just don't know, but can't be worse than Zach Wilson, right? So it has, like, anybody is an upgrade on Zach Wilson. So I guess, 4,300, the price is right. I'm certainly cheering for him because he's one of my highest owned best ball receivers. But you probably don't want to factor that in. Yeah, I think that he looks like a very solid play. I'll be playing some Garrett Wilson as well. Definitely one of the more interesting plays here. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that on Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite cheap plays. It's going to be popular, but it looks like even under-owned according to the Boom Bust tool. And then, by the way, on FanDuel, he's actually one of the most positive leverage players on the entire FanDuel slate, where he's actually 6,000 and somewhat low and just south of 10% ownership. So Wilson's going to be somebody who I'll be having in a lot of my lineups. Any other cheap wide receivers do you like using to try to save some salary with?
DeAndre Carter looks great with Mike Williams out for this game. He's just 3,700, coming in at 4.6% ownership, 8.4% chance of being optimal. I think that he's really interesting. I actually think we can throw in Sky Moore as somebody who I am going to have interest in with both. And of course, I've been chasing this all year with both Mecole Hardman and Kadarius Toney out. I think Sky Moore could have an opportunity here, and he is just 3,000 now. Not guaranteed. We do still have, I think Justin Watson is actually ahead of him on the depth chart. Actually, Justin Watson also just 3,000, coming in at 4.2% ownership. So maybe you just want to go there instead. But I think that both those guys are going to be in play, especially because we like Patrick Mahomes. I think that I would consider both of those guys in a Patrick Mahomes stack as well. Trent Sherfield, we talked about how you generally don't need to go to the alternate receivers for Miami. You can just go to Waddle and Hill, but we do have positive leverage on Trent Sherfield. He's 3,200. We have him at 3.2% projected ownership, 3.5% chance of being optimal. Some interest there. And then I got to say, if Greg Dortch ends up playing, I'm going to have a lot of interest in a 3,100 Greg Dortch with Rondale Moore already ruled out. We saw Greg Dortch coming in and see like 10 targets or so last week, or 11, some ridiculous number of targets after obviously Rondale Moore was hurt the first play of the game. Greg Dortch just stepped in and played the exact role that we expected Rondale Moore to play. So if he's going to be playing that role for Arizona and he's 3,100, Maybe the ownership comes up if he is ruled in. We currently have him at 4.2% ownership with a 5% chance of being an optimal. But if the ownership holds at anything under 10% and he is ruled in and he's healthy, I'm going to have a lot of interest in Greg Dortch against this Chargers defense, even though they're 11th against the pass, so better against the pass than the rush. But the Cardinals have a 23 implied team total. I definitely have interest there. Do you think you'd see yourself getting to any Dortch if he's active?
Yeah, a couple other things to consider as well. The most important one, Kyler Murray's expected to play this week. So that's obviously a big upgrade over Colt McCoy being there at quarterback. And then, I mean, we've seen Dortch be a chalky option. What was it, week 3 or something like that? I can't remember exactly when it was, but there was a slate where it made a whole lot of sense to play Dortch. And he ended up scoring a touchdown that game. He had a pretty decent receiving game relative to his price tag. So we've seen him do it before, and I definitely think that there's some potential there. So definitely makes sense to me. Rondell Moore. Also, as far as that injury goes, every once in a while you get some sweat-free bets you win. I had unders on Rondell Moore for receiving yards and for receptions last game, and then he gets hurt on the first time he touches the ball. Finished with -6 yards, so that one ended up coming through. I do end up seeing a lot of tweets come across my timeline where people think whenever there's an injury, it's rigged against whatever $3 bets they have. Yeah. It's never considered that. I see people complaining like, "Oh, this is rigged so sportsbooks win." It's like, no, I had the other side. I won my bets. But players get hurt sometimes. It's the risk of the game. But anything else you like at value at wideout?
Yeah, so I see somebody brought up Treylon Burks. Burks is a little bit interesting. I have heard him get some steam around the industry. We have him just for a 7% projected ownership with a 5% chance to be an optimal. So a little bit of negative leverage. I could see his ownership coming in even higher than that because Burks is just 4,200. And he's a sexy name. I think the talented rookie is a guy that people want to play. So I would expect the ownership to actually come in a little bit higher than we have it. Although again, I'm usually the ownership is better than I usually am at guessing what we're going to see. But I would guess it comes in a little bit higher. So I think that Burks is interesting. But if you're playing, as I said, I think Burks is getting a little bit of steam. That just maybe makes Robert Woods also a little bit more interesting. We actually have positive leverage on Robert Woods coming in at 2% ownership, 4% chance of being optimal. So I think Woods is in play, but I also think you could consider pivoting to Robert Woods there as somebody who not getting a ton of ownership and Tennessee's probably going to be throwing the ball at some point against this Cincinnati defense. So some interest there. Terrace Marshall actually looks really good. 0.8% ownership, 3% chance of being optimal at 3,900. He's been very involved for Carolina the past handful of weeks. So I will have some interest in a low owned Terrace Marshall. Trying to see if there's anybody else who jumps off the page at me.
By the way, I like Phillip. Seems like he's leaning towards playing Treylon Burks. Burks might be the real deal because he has looked really good when he's gotten a play. Now we haven't seen him play all that much. There's been all kinds of weird scenarios where he's been hurt, and then we've also seen the Titans were a little bit slow to bring him on at the start of the year. They had the quarterback change in the middle of the year. I know that wasn't when Burks was healthy at the time, but there's been a lot of weird uncertainty in the Titans passing game with Burks individually. He was a high pick in the draft. I think he's really talented, so I like buying on him because I wouldn't be surprised if he gets to this point next year and he's, $2,000 or so more expensive and is more of an established wide receiver. So a good chance to buy low on a player who might be a star in the future. So I have no issue with that whatsoever. Was there anything else you really want to talk about a wide receiver?
Oh yeah. People are bringing up that Marquise Brown maybe coming back. I don't remember what the latest is on that. I think it might have been that he is.
He's expected to play this weekend. I am curious to see if he's going to be on a pitch count. So my current expectation, and I'm also going to check, see if there's been any updates, is that he is going to play, but be limited. That's what my thoughts are with him.
Okay. Yeah, I think in which case, if he is limited, then I will still have a lot of interest in low-owned Greg Dortch. If he is a full go, I still think that I'd have some interest in Greg Dortch. I don't think that it completely eliminates Greg Dortch as a play, but that's a good point that people brought up. That is something to factor in, that it does change the dynamics a little bit, where Greg Dortch is probably not going to be the number 2 receiver in that scenario. He becomes, more. That's probably why the tools don't absolutely love Greg Dortch, because they're assuming that we're going to be seeing some Hollywood Brown as well. I thought there was one other player that I wanted to bring up. Who is playing against the Panthers? That's what I was just looking at. Oh yeah. So Cortland Sutton, I think, is kind of interesting. the Broncos have been just so bad that they have an 18.75 implied team total against the Panthers, who are 21st against the pass and 21st against the rush in terms of DVOA. So just a great spot for the Broncos. And still, they have just an 18.75 implied team total. So they've been bad enough that nobody's expecting anything. Maybe I need to stop chasing this. I still think that they have that big game. At some point, we're going to see a spike from this Broncos offense. Maybe I'm foolish for chasing it, but Courtland Sutton, 5,600. We have him at 9% projected ownership, 11% chance to be an optimal. So a little bit of positive leverage on Courtland Sutton, another name I want to throw out there.
Yeah,
Jerry Jeudy out.
So Jeudy being out matters more to me than I'm over Russell Wilson at this point in terms of I think he's probably washed at this point. At the tail end of last year, there was a point where it was like, all right, he's injured. He was coming back from the finger injury, which remember they'd said that the time frame, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Something along the lines of they said like, oh, he's going to be out for 3 months, and then he returned like 4 weeks later and just looked terrible. And then there's also like, oh, but he's doing finger therapy 18 hours per day. Every weird Russell Wilson story that comes out. So I didn't think there was a realistic reason to think that his struggles at the tail end of last year were just because he came back crazy early from this finger injury. Now I'm starting to wonder was it really the finger injury, or was it just masking the fact that he might have been washed at that point? That's kind of where I'm leaning right now. I have not really played any of Denver for a considerable amount of time now. So just because I'm so low on Russell Wilson at this point, it's hard for me to really be on Courtland Sutton. But I do understand that Jerry Jeudy being injured, that does change the dynamics there a little bit. Let's talk about the tight ends. But first, shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's tournament strategy show. If you guys haven't signed up at Prize Picks yet, you can do it by clicking on the link below or click on the link that's about to get thrown into the YouTube chat. Because when you click on that link, you get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. But in addition, you're going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum. So you haven't signed up at Stokastic, or if you want to sign up at Stokastic and are trying to find a really cost-effective way to do it, this is a pretty good way. You sign up at Prize Picks and you get 1 free month of all the tools that we have over here. Now let's wrap this up, Neil, by talking about the tight ends. And this is pretty simple for me. We've got Mark Andrews. We've got Travis Kelce. I'm going to be paying up at tight end. I'm not going to be paying up a whole bunch at wide receiver outside of Tyreek Hill. At the running back position, there are some other cheap plays that I like as pivots off of the really popular plays. I'm going to be saving up some money to pay up at tight end. Travis Kelce is going to be my most roster tight end. Mark Andrews, number 2. I'll be mixing in some of the lower owned guys, but this is a week where I feel like I'll be a little bit more concentrated at tight end. How do you feel about the pay up options?
Yeah, I love the pay up options. And obviously, you look at the boom bust tool that backs up playing these pay up options. We've got Travis Kelce at 13% ownership, 19% chance to be an optimal. Mark Andrews at 14% ownership, 15% chance to be an optimal. Both guys look great. They're both. We didn't even talk about Lamar Jackson. I should say that I think that you could still do a skinny stack of Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. It's not one of the best looking stacks out there, but also not getting a ton of ownership against the Jaguars. So I think that stack is also in play. But even without Lamar Jackson, I think Mark Andrews is just a very interesting play at 6,500. I'm going to be probably above the field on both of those guys. Gesicki, another guy you can throw into those Miami stacks. We talked about, you don't need to necessarily get different with your Miami stacks, but if you wanted to, Gesicki, we've got at 5% ownership, 9% chance to be an optimal. That is pretty interesting. One player I want to talk about, and I actually don't see him in the boom bust tool. I don't know if I'm just missing it, but Gerald Everett is in just a great spot against the Arizona defense has just been atrocious against tight ends. I like Gerald Everett in general. So I think in a spot where he looks especially good, especially with no Mike Williams too, I'm going to have a lot of interest in Gerald Everett, despite not being able to see. Obviously, it is ownership dependent. I can't see what his ownership is currently.
So Everett missed last week's game. Yeah. And it looks like we haven't added him back in yet, but all indications are that he's going to be back and able to play this week. He's been practicing. So I assume that we are going to have Gerald Everett back. And if that is the case, then yeah, I think without Mike Williams, you try to figure out where some of the extra targets are going to go. Keenan Allen looks really good in our projection. So does Josh Palmer, but you can make a similar type case for Gerald Everett as well. So no issue with that whatsoever. I'm seeing in chat people asking about Foster Moreau. Yeah, as far as the cheap tight ends go, he's by far the most popular. Actually, I shouldn't say by far. Him and Hayden Hurst are kind of comparable, both of them being right around 10% owned, Foster Moreau being 10.5%, Hayden Hurst being 9.5% owned. I don't have an issue with either of them if you're looking to save money at tight end. I just prefer spending up this weekend.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. I think they're both solid enough plays. If they fit into, if you're doing a game stack or something, I think both those guys look great. And you can play them, without a game stack too. I think that they're definitely both in play. They have that spike week upside, but neither of them stands out to me as much as Andrews, Kelsey, Gerald Everett. And then we could also throw George Kittle, looks great. 3.3% ownership, 6.4% chance to be an optimal. So he's not a full pay up, but still on that pay up kind of trend. He looks like one of the better options on this slate as well. Tyler Higbee, we talked about, could be a potential run back if you want to run back your Chief stacks. Tyler Higbee is certainly a guy you could consider in that spot. Trey McBride, 3,100, now taking over as the starting tight end. Actually, he looks a little bit overowned. 4.7% ownership, 2.8% chance to be an optimal, but I still think that he is in play at that number. And then Greg Dulcich. I mean, if you do want to believe in this Denver offense at all, if you think they have anything left in the tank, Greg Dulcich is a guy, 3,700, 5% ownership, 7.2% chance of being optimal. And again, no Judy, no KJ Hamler. So Greg Dulcich now one of the primary receiving options for Russell Wilson at 3,700 is pretty interesting.
So let's wrap this up now, Neil, with the way we end the show every week, and we give out our favorite stack. So if we were making one lineup in a large field GPP or single entry tournament, this is who Neil and I would be stacking. So we'll wrap it up with this. If you guys haven't done it yet, do us a big favor, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. So Neil, I think you and I are both going to be leaning kind of similar ways here. There's two stacks that you and I do like quite a bit more than the other teams, the Miami Dolphins and the Kansas City Chiefs. But if you're making one lineup, what would be your stack option?
So I like both of those. It would probably be, Miami looks so clearly the best in our tools, but I'm just to get a little bit different because I'm sure they're going to be talked about a lot tomorrow. I do really like the Chargers stack as well. I think that you could stack up Justin Herbert with Gerald Everett and either Keenan Allen or Josh Palmer or DeAndre Carter. Like there are so many great receiving options for the Chargers in this game. So I'll go there. I'll go Justin Herbert with Gerald Everett and Keenan Allen.
Yeah, so two core ones for me. One is going to be the Tua to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill combination. I know it's pretty pricey, but there are a lot of spots that I think we could save salary with reasonably on this slate. So I think that combination makes a lot of sense. It is by far what grades out the best in our top stacks tool. And then also, if we're looking at the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelce with MVS as a low-owned play that, number one, makes sense in our data, but also would just be tremendous and be a great way to troll Eric if it hits. So those two stacks, I think, are ones that I could definitely get behind. That is going to do it for us today, guys. A lot more content coming up on the YouTube channel later on today. We've got a weird NBA slate that locks very late because they forewent the earlier game in order to just do a really late slate that's only 3 games. So NBA Deep Dive, NBA Live Before Lock, that'll be tonight. I'll be on Live Before Lock with Matt LaMarca. So check out all of that later, guys. But enjoy the weekend and good luck on Sunday with all your lineups.